Well, that is sadly all the time we've got left for now. You can, of course, get all of the latest sports news on our website at bbc.com/sport. But from me, Mark Edwards, and the rest of the Sport Today team, we'll see you in an hour's time. Bye-bye.
For the first time ever, television viewers in their homes would now be able to watch the crowning of their Queen as it happened.
Whenever we got another refusal from the government, out would come the banner headline, "Government still opposing BBC TV." Because we knew we were right. We knew the public not only wanted to see it, but deserved to see it.
The BBC was the fortress of British culture. You were allowed to make a film in any style you liked. It was my film school.
BBC children's programmes were deeply respected. If it had been on any other channel, it would not have had the same power.
The BBC has helped to define who we are. It's helped to define our identity.
One was able to do what I'm committed to do, which is to make films about real people and real people's lives.
You might say iconic is a bit of an overused word, but the BBC Marconi Type A literally is an icon. The basis of the symbol on most computers worldwide.
Welcome to Newsday. I'm Karishma Vaswani, reporting live from Bali as the G20 summit officially gets underway. On the eve of the summit, Joe Biden shook hands with Xi Jinping for the first time since taking office and played down fears of a confrontation with China.
I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, and we were candid and clear with one another across the board.
Also coming up, a special report on Indonesia's energy dilemma. It's one of the biggest coal producers in the world. We ask if it can build a cleaner future and at what cost. Ukraine's President Zelensky visits the recaptured city of Kherson days after the Russian withdrawal. And one of the world's richest men, the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, pledges to give away most of his wealth.
This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to Bali, the Indonesian island where the G20 summit is due to get underway in just a few hours' time. There's a lot for the world's largest economies to talk about, but certainly the themes of stability and growth will be key here. And these countries are meeting after a relative period of isolation, coming, of course, after the pandemic, and leaders are getting a chance to meet face to face, many of them for the very first time since the pandemic started. Amongst them, of course, US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping, who got a chance to sit down, thrash out some thorny issues over a course of 3 hours or so on topics ranging from issues like Taiwan to the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Our North America editor Sarah Smith has more. James Crabtree, the Executive Director of the Institute of International Strategic Studies. Thanks so much for joining us on Newsday. For now, that's it from me here in Bali, looking ahead to the G20 summit. But Monica, I'll have lots more for you a little later on in the programme and throughout the day here on BBC News. So thanks for joining me. Back to you, Monica.
We'll be watching. And you're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Ukraine's president visits the southern city of Kherson to celebrate its liberation after the withdrawal of Russian troops. This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Monica Miller in Singapore. Our headlines. President Biden has played down fears of a new Cold War with China after holding his first talks since being elected with Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping said Taiwan was a red line, but told Mr. Biden that the world is big enough for both nations to prosper. The president of the Ukraine has been to the southern city of Kherson just days after his troops recaptured the following withdrawal of Russian forces. Vladimir Zelensky said, step by step, Ukraine is reclaiming the territories invaded by Russia. Kherson was taken by Russia earlier in the war, and its recapture by Ukraine is a major strategic blow for the Kremlin. Now let's get back to Karishma Vaswani in Bali, where the G20 summit is just about to get underway. Yesterday we saw President Xi as well as President Biden sit down. What can we expect today?
Yeah, lots on the agenda, Monica. It is the official opening of the G20 summit in the next hour or so, and we are expecting world leaders of the largest economies to attend in person. Some not in person, though, I have to say. We've got President Zelensky of Ukraine appearing via video link, and he is expected to address the delegation later today. Of course, the war in Ukraine is that big backdrop to all of the discussions here, Monica. As we've discussed, it has been one of the critical issues that President Xi and President Biden discussed in their meeting ahead of the G20 on Monday. It's also been a key part of how the world is trying to tackle this economic issue for the entire global economy. Higher fuel and food costs, of course, which have been exacerbated by that war in Ukraine. And it's a key concern for host Indonesia that has been particularly worried about those rising costs. Lots to look forward to, lots to listen into right here at the G20 summit in Bali. I'll have all the information for you coming out throughout the day on BBC News. Thanks for watching. Welcome to Newsday. I'm Karishma Vaswani reporting live from Bali, where the G20 summit is officially getting underway. President Joe Biden shook hands with Xi Jinping for the first time since taking office and played down fears of a confrontation with China. Also coming up, a special report on Indonesia's energy dilemma.
I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, and we were candid and clear with one another across the board.
Also coming up, a special report on Indonesia's energy dilemma. It's one of the biggest coal producers in the world. We ask if it can build a cleaner future and at what cost. Ukraine's President Zelensky visits the recaptured city of Kherson days after the Russian withdrawal. And one of the world's richest men, the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, pledges to give away most of his wealth.
This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to Newsday, and I'm coming to you today from the Indonesian island of Bali, where the G20 summit is getting underway officially. Now, the focus at the summit, of course, will be about the global economy, issues around stability and growth. And for many of the countries attending today, it will be the first time that they will have a chance to meet face-to-face these leaders since the pandemic. In particular, attention has been focused on that crucial meeting between the Chinese leader Xi Jinping and the US President Joe Biden that took place on the eve of the summit, where they spoke about a range of issues, from the sensitive and delicate issue of Taiwan to the use of nuclear weapons. My colleague, the North America editor, Sarah Smith, has more. James Crabtree, Executive Director of the Institute of International Strategic Studies, who's in Singapore for us. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. And for now, that's it from me here in Bali. I will be back with you shortly to give you the latest details on who's attending the G20 and what the main issues are. We'll talk more about climate change, of course, as well as the global economy. But for the rest of the day's news, let's head to the studio in Singapore and join my colleague, Monica Miller.
Thank you very much, Karishma Vaswani. And you are watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the program. The BBC celebrates the 100th anniversary of its first official radio broadcast. This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Monica Miller in Singapore. Our headlines. Leaders from the world's top 20 economies are gathering in Bali for this year's G20 summit. High on the agenda, the energy crisis and the ongoing war in Ukraine. President Biden has played down fears of a new Cold War with China after holding his first big talks since being elected president with Xi Jinping. The president of Ukraine has been to the southern city of Kherson just days after Russian troops withdrew from the city. Vladimir Zelensky addressed soldiers in the main square, saying Ukraine is moving step by step towards liberating all occupied territories. Losing Kherson is a major strategic blow for Russia, though Moscow insists it remains Russian territory. Now, can you solve a Rubik's Cube? George Scoley, a so-called speed cubing champion, has set a new record by solving the puzzle 6,931 times in the space of 24 hours. His average speed per cube is 12 seconds, but he can do it in nearly half that time. Here's George Scoley on BBC News earlier. Watch and marvel. Now let's go back to Karishma Vaswani in Bali. I know that's exactly what you're working on there at the G20.
Yeah, absolutely, Monica. It is far more complex, perhaps some would say, than a Rubik's Cube, but perhaps not as well. There's just so much to discuss here at the G20 that is underway now. We've seen leaders arriving at the summit ahead of a lot of discussions today. The first working summit is going to be about food security. And as we've been talking about, Monica, of course, a key theme here at the G20 for a lot of countries that are trying to manage that difficult challenge of ensuring that food and fuel prices remain low for their populations. In particular, the host country of the G20 this year, Indonesia, very concerned about this. In my conversations with the Indonesian president ahead of the summit, he talked about how he's crisscrossed the globe, meeting with the presidents of Ukraine and Russia to try and get them to agree to ensure that the supply of grain out of the area comes through in a stable fashion. Of course, that blockade has led to prices of other commodities around the world going up, having an impact on the price of food in countries like Indonesia. And all of this at a time when inflation in the global economy is becoming more and more difficult to manage. And it's something that's really on the top of minds of a lot of the leaders here who are looking at the next 18 months or so. I'm trying to figure out how they're going to ensure that prices remain stable for their economies. The other big issue has been that discussion between the US and China, of course, that took place on the eve of the G20 summit. And it's something that a lot of leaders in this part of the world really were very concerned about when that discussion was highly anticipated. But by all accounts, Monica, as we were talking to James Steinberg a little earlier on in the program, that discussion seems to have gone relatively well, but the hard work really begins now. And as James Crabtree was saying, nothing really meaningful in terms of what will be achieved here, but the fact that people are sitting down and actually getting a chance to talk face to face is what's really important. That's it from me for now from Bali. Thanks so much for watching. Welcome to Newsday. I'm Karishma Vaswani reporting live from Bali as the G20 summit officially gets underway. World leaders from the top 20 economies are attending. High on the agenda, the energy crisis, food security, and the ongoing war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden shook hands with Xi Jinping for the first time since taking office and played down fears of a confrontation with China.
I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, and we were candid and clear with one another across the board.
We have a special report on Indonesia's energy dilemma. It's one of the biggest coal producers in the world, but can it build a cleaner future, and at what cost? We'll have lots more from Bali on all of that in just a moment. Also, coming up on the program, Ukraine's President Zelensky visits the recaptured city of Kherson days after the Russian withdrawal. And one of the world's richest men, the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, pledges to give away most of his wealth.
This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and welcome to Newsday. I'm coming to you from Bali, the Indonesian island where the G20 summit is officially underway. We can show you live pictures of the arrivals of some of the leaders, in fact, as they're making their way to the meetings where they will have so much to discuss today. You can see there the grand entrance where leaders will be gathering. The first meeting is expected to be a discussion about the food security, the biggest challenge possibly facing the world today when it comes to ensuring that people do have access to affordable food prices. But at the same time, this is also an opportunity for these leaders to meet face to face, many of them getting a chance to do so for the very first time after the relative isolation of the pandemic. Two men in particular who have already met face to face on the eve of the summit, that has been Joe Biden, the US president, and the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. They talked about a range of issues, from everything from Taiwan to the use of nuclear weapons. My colleague, the North America editor, Sarah Smith, has more. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd there, thanks so much for joining us. And just to say that as we've been talking, we are seeing the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi greeting the Indonesian leader Joko Widodo, two very large economies and becoming increasingly important on the global stage. But for now, that's it from me in Bali. I'd like us to join Monica Miller, who's back in the studio in Singapore for us with the rest of the day's news.
Thank you, Karishma. And you are watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the program. The BBC celebrates 100th anniversary of its first official radio broadcast. This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Monica Miller in Singapore. Our headlines. Leaders from the world's top 20 economies are gathering in Bali for this year's G20 summit. High on the agenda, the energy crisis, the ongoing war in Ukraine. President Biden has played down fears of a new Cold War with China after holding his first talks since becoming president with Xi Jinping. The president of Ukraine has been to the southern city of Kherson just days after Russian troops withdrew from the city. Vladimir Zelensky addressed soldiers in the main square, saying Ukraine is moving step by step towards liberating all occupied territories. Losing Kherson is a major strategic blow for Russia, though Moscow insists it remains Russian territory. To Karishma Vaswani in Bali, where the G20 summit is now underway.
Yeah, Monica, just listening into that report and how it does take a fair amount of physical fitness, doesn't it, for us to read news bulletins, not just in the studio, but out here on the scene in Bali. And as you can see behind me, it is raining now. The clouds have opened as leaders are gathering inside that summit venue to discuss some of the key issues facing the global economy today. I want to show you some of the scenes at the summit. It's of course being held on the Indonesian island of Bali, and what we're looking at are some of the traditional decorations that you see on this resort island, very much a way to herald in good luck, if you will. It's often something that you see during other festivals here in Bali at times to bring in the good fortune and a good harmonious opportunity for people to sit down and have good discussions. And that's certainly the ambition, the intention of host Indonesia at this summit. The G20 has been a real moment of pride for Indonesia. It's Indonesia's coming out party, if you will, an opportunity to showcase this country's economic ambitions as well. And as these world leaders start arriving here, it will be a chance for Joko Widodo, the president, to also discuss some of the key issues he wants to face. And just as we've been talking, the Mexican leader has arrived as well at the G20. So much to discuss and so much to get through with a working meeting underway, particularly focused on food security. But for now, that's it from me and the team in Bali. Do stay with BBC News for the rest of the day's news.
Hello there. It's remaining cold for this upcoming week across Scandinavia.